All right, so let's get started. We've got a great night ahead of us. Again, my goals with class are always twofold. One is to connect. It's to do relationship. It's to just get relationally filled. Like I literally want you to leave class. I mean, you're going to be tired, especially you East Coast folks. You're going to be tired. Um, but to feel like this was a good use of your time because you got those relational nutrients, right? Just by being in class, by being with me, by being with each other, by being with yourselves, and by being with God. And so that's one of my goals always with class is that you get relationally filled, and you get the relational nutrients you need. And then the other is that you learn the material, you learn new material, and you integrate new material with old material so that it becomes sort of new material to work with in new and different ways. So, so the way that, yeah, I put every class together, those are my two goals. And I think that you'll be able to experience that tonight. So let's start off with prayer. And I would love for someone to maybe volunteer to pray. And my only request, though, is that you use the word sex when you pray. Somewhere in your prayer, because I want to help you integrate God and sex, okay? Or Jesus and sex. All right. So who wants to practice some integration here?
I'll do it.
Yay!
Sounds fun.
Love
All
it.
right. Father God, we just thank you for the opportunity to come together tonight as a class and to learn about sexuality and just to learn about your vision for sex, but also how to help and support others in this really important area. God, we thank you for what you're doing already through this class in each of us. God, we ask you to continue to grow us and help us to learn and help our hearts to be open and ready to receive what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and just I would love for you to do your check-in. Um, and by the way, I think now with the program, you're supposed to participate in class, and if you don't participate in class, like then somehow like there's a threat of not getting all your points or something. And so I just want to make it really easy on you. Everybody does a check-in, and that way you automatically get your points too after you submit that assignment. Okay, so with your check-in though, I would love for you. I was listening to Henry Cloud. I'm a big Dr. Cloud fan, and he was talking about how in his family growing up, they not growing up in his family of procreation. So his family. With Tori and the girls, they always did this like roses and thorn thing where at the end of the day or like around the dinner table or something, they would talk about, the rose of the day, which was like the positive, right? Like the fun, life-giving, just sweet smelling, just the neat part of the day. And then the thorn, which is the prickly, the hard part, the yucky part, the not as nice part of their day. And I was just thinking about, again, integration is just one of the stages of character structure development. And so being able to hold the positive and the negative, the rose with a thorn, right? Because the whole thing makes the rose bush what it is, and the thorns protect the roses in different ways. And so yeah, love for you to mention kind of what your current rose in taking this class is, and then also what maybe your current struggle, current like unsettledness, what your thorn might be in taking this class. And then just thinking about, I think there are just different things on the table right now based on our last class and 2 weeks of discussion board postings and your journaling and all that. The sexual shame, like where are you with that? You can talk about character structure development around sexuality, where are you in your process with that? Is there a rose, that you want to celebrate? Is there a thorn that you want to receive comfort with, or just, be with us in that space? Sexual identity development, how you're thinking about that, your own, somebody else's, working with clients, sexual ethics, right? There's just, how do you make sense of what's right and wrong sexually? And then anything else about sex that you want to mention. so so those are just possibilities to talk about in terms of, yeah, what's working for you, what's the highlight, the positive, and then also what's the unfinished, unsettled, prickly, hurtful, yeah, part. Okay. So, and if you just maybe take 2 minutes a piece, just because we have lots of other material, I want to make sure that we are able to get through tonight too. That would be great. Okay, who wants to start?
I can start.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. I felt like there was a lot of rose and thorn comparisons, so I I don't know where to start.
A lot of bushes out there.
Lots of bushes. They're blooming everywhere. I guess the rose for me regarding the class is that this is like a topic that I've always wanted to talk about because it's so not talked about in Christian circles. And it's like, I'm such a curious person. I'm like, and I love touching on taboo things. I'm like, why don't we talk about these things? What's wrong with it? And so a curiosity part of me, and also just the like freedom part of me that knows God's character and knows that he wants freedom for us. So that really like fills me with joy. And I'm curious to see other people's point of views and see how they might not align with mine or how they do. Mostly because I feel like I don't really know much. Like I've only lived my experience. And so I wonder what other people's experiences are. And then I guess the thorn being that very same thing, the same coin, right? Of like, is what I've experienced and what I know about sex wrong? Is it narrow-minded? I don't know. And I've lived through really traumatic things. I know that much. And so part of me wonders whether that could ever be cleared. Like, will I ever have like a godlike sexuality with what I've lived through? So just like kind of wrestling with that. But mostly I think I'd say the rose is stronger than the thorn. So.
And was that true 2 weeks ago for you?
No. Yeah, the thorn was probably stronger just because it was scary. And at the time, it so happened to coincide with some personal things where I was getting triggered. And so,
yeah.
Week. So.
Yeah, no, that's neat that you've had that shift. And I love Sarah. Again, I don't know how many of you watched my week 3 video, but going back to one of Adam Young's podcasts on like trying to figure out like what's my job here on this earth, right? Like what are the talents I've been given? The Allender Center, they refer to like our calling as our kingdom. What's my area of purview? Who am I to work with? And what does that look like as I live my life out? And so as you were talking, Sarah, I just was thinking about like just your hunt, your passion for freedom. It's like rip those fig leaves off and let's get back to Eden, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're covered up, like we're not being who God created us to be. And we're not living in all the fullness that he has called us to live in. And so I don't know. I just love that about you. And you're just, on that hunt for freedom and just being able to be who God created you to be. And being able to walk with other people in their journey as well.
Yes. Yeah. Help guide them there.
Cool. Yeah. Perfect. And it makes sense then that that's where you have been assaulted by evil as well in your own life, right?
Exactly.
And that's a thorn, right? I mean, that is the way that Satan works.
Yes. The very same place you're called to is where he's gonna.
Yeah. Because he's just not going to go after us and spend a lot of time with us in areas that it just doesn't matter that much. Yeah. So I just encourage you to keep fighting that, and I'll keep fighting that fight with you for more freedom and more breakthrough and just more healing,
Yes.
so that you can experience more of, again, just who God created you to be and all, of what it means to be a sexual being, for you, but then also, again, just your work with other people as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right. Who's next?
I will go next.
Okay, Sophia.
Um, yeah, again, like Sarah, I hope that I'm answering the right questions. There was a lot of rose and thorn. And all I wrote down was rose good, thorn hard. So
Yeah.
hopefully I'm on the right track here.
Yeah.
Um, I think so far in the course, the rose for me has been the developmental stuff that we studied this week. I'm very much into like the sexual side of developmental stages and kind of how kiddos progress through it. So that was really interesting for me. The thorn has definitely been the very biblical heavy generalizations of men and women,
Mhm.
which has been a big thorn in my side. Those are hard for me to deal with. I don't know if I fully agree with them. I think it's a really broad stroke in a lot of the stuff that we've been reading as far as men are like this and women are like this. And I just tend to look at humanity as much more complex than that. And sexuality certainly is more complex than that. And so
Mhm.
that has been hard for me. As far as like an update on my shame, I think it's getting better. Um, yeah, I think it's improving over the last couple weeks. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think you've done a great job in your posts and just in your writings, Sophia, of just being honest, yeah, about your struggles and just naming them, and being in the struggle, um, and not, I don't know, expressing, I guess, a lot of separation, right? A lot of identity, and just having creating that space for you to exist, even, if it's different than the writers of, again, the PowerPoints, or, of any of the material that you're reading. And truly, when Nancy developed this course, she did develop it as, a biblical sexuality course, right? And so yeah, I like keep letting, the program know that it's not a human sexuality course, that you would, take in any master's of counseling program. It's just, that's not what the purpose of this course. It was originally titled Intimacy, and this was all before KCREP. It was the very beginning of the program, and so the needs of the course have actually just changed, but they just haven't, kept that up. So I keep telling them I'll redesign the course, and I'll get it KCREP approved and all of that. But yeah, being able to have kind of a really strong biblical ethical focus around sexuality and, other perspectives, because I just think we live in a world that we need to be able to, um, we can figure out where we want to land, which, again, that's part of your own professional identity development as you take this course. And hopefully week 5, we're going to spend more time on that in class, developing your own professional sexual ethics. So where you land, like, that's between you and God and maybe the most important people in your life, but I don't care where you land ultimately. I'm not invested in that. I am invested in your journey. And so, again, that idea of, what do you hate, right? What are you not okay with? What are you pushing against? And to see that come out in you, in this class around certain material, because you hated that more than some other people hated that. That's not what they went after. That's not what they pushed against. That's not what they were protesting. So again, we're the body of Christ, and we all have different functions, and we're called to work with different people. And so paying attention to, yeah, what do you hate? What are you not okay with? What are your thorns? And then what are your roses? What do you love? What do you move toward? What are you passionate about? And then, yeah, where have you been assaulted? Because there's going to be a connection there. And that's probably part of your calling then. So yeah, so yeah, good job with all of that. Yeah. All right, Savannah, go for it.
I think the rose for me has definitely been just getting more comfortable talking about all of this and reading about it. And I've actually been surprised at how quickly I feel desensitized to it. I really thought this would take a little bit longer. But I've been surprised that even just with friends, like having these conversations has come so much easier than it had just 2 weeks ago. And so that's been cool to see because I feel like already a lot more prepared to talk about this stuff with clients. And then the thorn is I've just kind of echoing a little bit what Sophia said, like the biblical piece, right? Like sometimes always doesn't line up with where I would have lined it up. But that said, I've noticed particularly like some of the language in the book, I really do believe like sexuality is sacred and beautiful. And I think, right, like God's presence and Holy Spirit and all of these very spiritual ideas and concepts are involved and that God's involved. And using those words in there, sometimes I've been like, ooh, that is weird to like see that written out, like God's sexual language is. And I'm like, like, I don't know. I don't know if like that's how I would have phrased that. Like, does God have a sexual language? It's weird to say God has a sexual language. So that has been the thorn for me, just like kind of cringing at some of these things and kind of believing in it as a general concept that like God's involved, but also like really not wanting to just name it like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, a lot of challenge around just probably the lack of integration in your own sexual identity development, right? And especially around being a Christian and being sexual and worshiping God, serving God and being able to, do all of that all at once. Yeah. And so I think that's part of what this class can highlight are those splits that we've had. And again, it's not like we created those splits. It's just nobody helped us integrate them. Nobody said, yeah, when we say our prayers tonight, let's thank God for our sexuality, right? Let's use God and sex in the same sentence. And when we're worshiping, in fact, I almost emailed you all on Sunday and then I can't remember why I didn't. But sometimes I actually feel a little vulnerable because I'm like, I know I can be pretty loose, but also, I don't know. I mean, there's part of me, I just like want you to like me too. So it can get kind of challenging at times to try to challenge all of you. But I almost sent you an email saying, okay, it's Sunday morning, figure out a way to worship God with your body and with your sexuality. Like if you go to church, you're going to worship, like whatever you're going to do. Bring your body with you, bring your spirit with you, but bring your genitals with you and worship God. And whatever that looks like for you, go for it. So I'm like, but yeah, if I send this in an email, then it's like written down and then it could be forwarded to somebody. I'm like, I better not do that. So wasn't planning on telling you this in class, but that's how I think. Like, just right? God says in everything that you do, right? Do it to my glory. And so there's a way to be sexual, to have sex, to be integrated with our sexuality and live for his glory. And so I tend to believe that is true whether you're married, whether you're partnered, whether you're single, like regardless of your marital status, because in the end, unless you're LDS, which I live around a lot of LDS folks, Mormons here in Northeastern Oregon, but the Christian, typical Christian belief doesn't support that idea that there's marriage in heaven. And so somehow like the marriage thing is on this earth and it serves its purpose on this earth, but it doesn't get in the way of our relationship with God, doesn't enhance our relationship with God. We can use it to, but it can't ultimately help us be all of who he created us to be on this earth, if it's not given to everyone equally. So anyhow, I just, yeah, want to encourage you to, that integration piece is really, really cool. Yeah, glad to hear that you're doing that, Savannah. Okay, who's next?
Jump in.
All right, Chelsea, go for it.
I had something I was going to say, but then kind of both of like what Sophia said and Savannah said, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's going on for me too. So yeah, I think a handful of things, but I think my rose, I did watch your video, Marianne, and like the thing I love, thing I hate. I think one of my roses, I have been able to hone in on a little bit of that. Actually in my like homework call with Erin, just like I love working with women on like their voice, their sexuality, their healing, their trauma. And I kind of have a hate that I need to work on because it's also my thorn of kind of like the man's side. And so but I shouldn't say just like the man side. I can see myself in sessions with married couples, like really siding with the woman. And so I have a thorn of like how to figure out how to side equally with the man. So yeah, my love and hate is kind of paired in that, I think. And so, yeah, that's, I think, my rose and my thorn a little bit, along with integrating the biblical side of things, like other people have mentioned. But yeah, so I have some work to do there, but that's my rose and thorn.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And I encourage you to just be kind of curious about that. Yeah, because whenever we find ourselves kind of going with a split in session, like even if it's just liking one part of a person more than we like another part of that person, you know, but definitely with couples or even with families, being curious about what is it about that person or that part that we're wanting to push against, and is that something within ourselves that we're also like wanting to split off, or it's just not resolved, or we find threatening in some way. And so because it does happen. I mean, yeah. And so just
And I guess I'll add a caveat. It's not like the man that I hate. It's more like the man's inappropriate use of sex, if I was to clarify that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Something, yeah, with the position that he's taking or the way he's thinking about. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, Chelsea. Who would like to go next? Okay, Erin, go for it.
Yeah, so like Chelsea said, like echoing what they all kind of said, struggling with some of the same aspects of the reading and the PowerPoints. But I think the main thing that I've been kind of the thorn has been the book that we're reading, and just like, oh my goodness, there's so much to this subject that I'd never considered, I guess. And then it kind of sets up an expectation, I guess, for me in my marriage, like it should be this way, and it's not this way. So then what is that, how, but it's also kind of the rose too, is opening up conversations and being willing, and like Savannah said, like even just in a couple weeks being more open with conversations with friends about sexuality, and in the counseling room with clients and with my supervisor. And so it's definitely been like, oh, we can talk about this. It's like permission almost. So it's been good. It's also just a realization of how far I have to go. So good and bad, but yeah.
Right.
And adulthood's always been my main character structure that I've been working on. So that makes sense, like with the whole sexuality thing. So
like, oh, great, another area of adulthood that I'm
Right.
not there yet, and I gotta grow into.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And that, I think, yeah, that can be really, really big. And that idea that the more that you learn, the more that you realize you don't know. And yeah, a lot of times I kind of go through that period too, where it's like, okay, I'm just overwhelmed first. And then it's like, okay, bite-sized pieces. Gotta cut that steak up a little bit or a lot. Yeah. Make them bite-sized pieces so I can chew them and metabolize them. Yeah, take my time eating them. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Erin. All right, Janet.
So the overwhelm, page 72, about an inch from the bottom, it says, if you're overwhelmed by this. So you can go there and read.
What does it say? Masturbate? No.
Yeah, no. Well, speaking of masturbate, I was liking what Savannah had said too about language. So on the way to worship, I said to my husband, I was talking about masturbation, and I said, and then I'm like, I wonder how many people are talking about masturbation as they're going to worship. So anyway, I'm and that's an element of my rose, is to be more open with my husband, to be more open with language. I saw today in session, in supervision, my supervisor and my supervision buddy were talking about a situation that abortion was the sort of the answer. And I was able to help them unpack a little bit about some options, and that anyway, it just was a really beautiful opportunity to talk about sex and how this couple was using their baby. And it just was something I probably wouldn't have done 2 weeks ago for sure.
Yay! Oh, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing for me. And then my thorn, again, with the church and some of the broad brush language, and sort of coincidentally, which, in a Christian way, I know God always has a plan. However, my national church is doing a study on women's roles and their unique calling this summer. And so I've drafted a letter, and I haven't sent it yet, but my response includes one of the points I'm making about this male and female roles in the church, is that about God's beautiful creativity, that he made Adam's femaleness visibly complete in Eve, and Eve's maleness part of her DNA. And I'm sort of, this is just something that's rolling around for me, and I think is there's something really important going on. I don't know what it all is yet, but it's happening. So that's sort of a thorn rose, but
yeah, our calling usually is a thorn rose. Yes, I love. Yeah, I can hear those stirrings inside of you, and I mean, just you're putting words to so much more of what's inside. And and making sure that you represent yourself accurately, and the right, you use the right words to fit what you really think and what you really feel. I know it's really important to you. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's like you're emerging as this I don't know, as a leader of some sort. Speaking truth, and having a voice of truth. Very cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yay. Fun to celebrate all the growth. Yeah, as a class, I want to tell you, because I've taught this course, I don't know, for 4 years, 5 years, however long the program has been going on. Nancy taught the very first course herself, and then they changed. Yeah, it was called Intimacy, and then they changed it to Human Sexuality. But I've been teaching it ever since. And again, as a class, as a whole, the amount of growth that you are making, that many of you have made in 2 weeks, like that's accelerated. As far as I'm concerned, it really, really is. And so, I just, gosh, I'm just super excited to celebrate all of that with you. Okay, who is next? Okay, Sandra. Oh, sorry, Stacy. I saw Sandra raise her hand.
Okay. I think a rose for me has I've been just pleasantly surprised with this class, like how much I liked it, which like, not that I was ever uncomfortable with sex, but I think I've just learned so much and I've enjoyed learning it. You know, I thought it was kind of going to be like one of those classes I was like, well, like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about that, you know, like sexuality of other people and stuff. And so I think I've just been like really surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and like reading our book, how much I've learned and stuff. Attempted to implement some things, as you saw in my journal, and last week was kind of a hot mess, but with a baby, and she got sick and stuff, and so it was just a disaster. But I feel like I've learned a lot, and I think that I'm almost opposite of some of my classmates, if I understand correctly, that like I almost appreciate like the learning of the biblical side of things because I didn't grow up Christian, and so I didn't really know any, like I knew the basics of like purity and like, I don't know, but I didn't really know like the extent of God's view on like sexuality or whatever. Like, and I always thought like, oh, it is strange that the church doesn't talk about this, or, you know, whatever, because I was kind of an open person. So I think I've just been kind of excited about that. And so like, cause I really like the idea of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but you're nodding, so I'm assuming you get it. And then a thorn for me, I don't know. I guess also the same thing, kind of the difficulty in implementing some of the things, or like kind of just figuring out like where the book can fit into my own life and kind of building my own comfort with it. Because it seems really simple when you're reading it, like, oh yeah, I just have to kind of like do this thing. And then actually trying to do it, I was like, okay, that's a mess. And so yeah, I think that would kind of be my thorn. And then I think I also kind of struggle with the PowerPoint aspect of the class, where like I'm kind of interpreting, because you know how PowerPoints are, they're kind of bullet points on things. And I'm like, I wonder what, if this was a presentation, like what the person would be saying, you know? So I think I struggle with the vagueness of that. So I'm always writing my discussion, like, I think I'm going in the right direction. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it sounds like, I mean, you're kind of like, if those of us that grew up in the church and had one experience around sex or sexuality, you're like going through the back door, and it's like entering from a different direction. Yeah. And so it makes sense that, yeah, there's a lot of information and a lot of structure that you're putting to your faith and your understanding of God, and, you know, your understanding of marriage, and just, yeah, integrating sexuality and relationship with God. And
yes, I think I'm getting more of a pleasant side of it than like other people who maybe grew up in that didn't get, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and then, yeah, it makes sense too, wanting more from the PowerPoints, right? Because you're just like wanting to soak in information. It's like, okay, give me all of it. Don't just, you know, bullet the main points for me, because I'm really wanting to learn here and put some structure to, to my understanding of my faith, and how I want to live out sexuality in my life, and then even in my work with clients. So cool. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Sandra. Stacy, you ready to go?
I think for me, I think that the rose is just awareness. Like, I think I came into this class kind of going, oh, I'm comfortable, you know, I can talk to clients, and, you know, I feel pretty okay in this area of my life. But then as I stepped back and I really started to like evaluate my life, like in terms my sexuality, like in terms of my character structure growth, I was like, whoa, okay, so I've done all this growth in attachment, but I've never considered it like within like how those places where I needed to grow like are still relevant like in my sexuality. And like I wrote that in my journal, like it's like the tentacles like of these hurt places or these hurt parts of yourself, like they just so far reach out. And I think that was kind of a thorn, like going, oh man, I thought, you know, I was at this place. And it was kind of like coming to terms with it all week, like, you know, the parts that you've worked on, they're still healed, and that's okay, you know, but there's new parts. You know, and so I think that's been kind of bittersweet.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of disappointing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And when I think about, maybe this will be helpful for you. eh, we have all these different areas of development, right? Like if you study Piaget, you'll learn about the different cognitive stages of development. And if you study Fowler, you'll learn about the stages of faith, or how does our faith develop as we grow, from young child to middle-aged child to older child to young teen, older teen. And if you can study all these different developmental theorists to look at, intellectual development. How do we develop that way? Psycho-emotional development, how do we develop that way? So our psychosexual development, or how we think about ourselves and how we experience our sexuality and how we develop an identity about who we are around our sexuality as sexual beings. I mean, that our sexual identity development is one area of identity development, just like social identity development, again, intellectual, cognitive, faith. They're all different areas of identity development. And so whatever, just like in our families, it happens in church too, whatever we don't talk about, we don't tend to develop. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And so I think that's where a lot of times, a lot of us have just gotten kind of stuck. We had the potential to grow in our sexual identity development and and integrate our sexuality and our sense of being a sexual person with our core self and who God created us to be all along. But if no one helped us, if no one attuned to our sexuality, to our body, to our way of talking about our sexuality and our body, and to the wonderings we had and the dreams that we had. And I mean, just like, because as parents, we attune to lots of areas of our child's development. But if we don't attune to their sexual process, then they kind of grow up thinking they don't have one. And that's kind of what I think you've described, Stacy, from the beginning, right? Like, I just didn't even know, like, I thought I was good, but I didn't even know that I didn't know what I didn't know. So now that I'm learning, I'm like, there's another identity development. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Mhm. Yeah. So that's why, as a therapist, it's very, very, very important, I think, that you attune to your client's sexuality, that you attune to their body, that you attune to their physical presence, and that you attune to their sexual desires and their sexual needs and their sexual language, right? That you attune to all of them and the way, however they present. And we're going to learn tonight about a lot of different ways people can present with their sexuality and sexual dysfunctions, sexual disorders. But it's so important that you as a therapist take responsibility for attuning to that part of your client's identity development too. Because if you don't, then they're just not going to be able to develop and then integrate that part of their identity in therapy with you. And you can still do good therapy in helping them, like, decrease their anxiety, or like, increase their mood so they're not as depressed, or help them work through trauma. You can still do lots of different work. But if you're wanting to do holistic work and helping somebody become a whole person and helping them become an adult, we have to attune to every single area of identity development, and sexuality is one of them. And it's not about waiting for your clients to bring, so vulnerably bring in their sexual inadequacy, or their, like, all the stuff that they've never maybe been taught how to talk about. They didn't know they could talk about. They didn't even know it existed inside of them. Yeah. So as a therapist, I mean, part of the, the way that this class is really constructed is for you to get really comfortable in talking about all areas of sexual development, because our clients need us to be the one to hold that space and to know that they have sexual dreams and desires and fantasies, and some of which are working for them and some of which are not. and they have deficits in their sexuality and their identity development. And they need permission to start telling their stories. And so as a therapist, we're the ones that give them permission to go there by going there ourselves, just like we do with our kids. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. All right. Robin, go for it.
I will just go with the kid part that you just ended on because that was one of my roses from the class is just implementing what I'm learning in my life. So I have two teenagers, 17 and almost 15. And just this week when we were reading all the stuff about all the development and then the adolescent piece and all of that. So I was talking to them both about it, and it's just really helpful for me to like get the push to do that. And it's fine. Like we've talked about, it's not that we've never talked about it, but no one really talked about it with me that much when I was a kid. So it's kind of like, how do you do this? I don't know. So I just went for it and just, and I feel like they're fine with it. When I did, we were all cool with it. It was good. So I just feel like it's been fun to just, actually do what I'm learning with my kids. And before they leave my house, they'll have lots of talk about sex. So, and then I guess the thorn is for me like looking forward to the paper we have to write. It feels a little scary because it's like you have to tell all sorts of things about yourself. So it's a little scary. But yeah, I guess I'm going to just go for it. And that's a thorn. So,
yeah. 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 However that works for you, Robin. But I appreciate you, mentioning that, naming that. It is a comprehensive paper. In fact, there have been handfuls of students that have pushed back on that paper. I don't know that when the class is redone, if that's actually a viable assignment for an academic course. But again, Nancy Houston, and we know what actually helps people really heal and grow. And so I just want to let you know that I really respect, the scariness of all that and the bigness of that paper. And so feel free to write whatever you want to write, submit whatever you want to submit. And also know though that I will hold whatever you share within myself. And a lot of times as I read those papers too, I literally just cry my way through. And most of the time when I read, like even your journal articles, I just want you to know, I'm celebrating your successes. And I'm also just, kind of talking to God about your struggles and, it just, So it's a, I don't know, pretty sacred spiritual process for me to just receive all that, the information that you're sharing as well. But if there's anything else I can do for you, Robin, in order to kind of make it safe and maybe a little bit more containing for you to write that paper in a way that really fits, like your process and what you need, let me know. The paper that I'm talking about, Randy, is week 4. You actually write your final paper for the course in week 4. And it's a big one. And because in week 5, 6, or 5, 6, and 7, then we actually start tackling one other book each week at a time and start talking about other specific areas. So, So it's almost like the first 4 weeks of this course is like the culmination of like your own sexual identity developmental journey and pulling all of that together. And then we start tackling sexual abuse, sexual addiction, and same-sex relationships the last 3 weeks. Yeah. Okay. Joan, go for it.
I think the rose for me is just the permission and the space that this class has given to push into questions and make me give answers for things that I wouldn't have had on my radar and wouldn't have been integrating in my work without the questions and feedback from being able to look at responses of other people in the class, and then also just kind of think about where I stand on different things. And so it's really made me look at my story a lot closer. So that's a rose, but I would say the flip side of that is that's really been a thorn, because I've had times where I was really angry at employers, parents, other significant adults in my life who have not honored my sexuality in that way. So, yeah.
Good for you. Yeah. It's like you're fighting for yourself and really acknowledging the grief around not being able to be who you really are in your sexuality. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Thanks, Joan. All right, Frederick, go for it.
I just want to make sure I understand the rose is the same as the love that you talk about, the things you love, and then the thorns, the hate kind of in the video that we had. I came in a little late in the class. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. The rose is like the positive.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up quite a bit on my end. I don't know if anybody else hears that.
Is that the same thing? Do I understand correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think well enough, but you are breaking.
I'm a little delayed. I don't know why, but
Yeah. Would it work, Frederick, for you to maybe just type your responses in the chat? Just because I'm afraid I'm going to end up missing some of what you say. And I'd hate to do that. Would that work for you?
had my hot spot on. I don't know why I'm breaking up.
Yeah. Yeah, if that works for you to write, your rose and your thorn in the chat. And then as you're doing that, if we can just maybe go on to somebody else to share, and then we can come back to you and read what you've shared.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just, I think that
it's
the
just
connection,
broken up.
Yeah, maybe not quite as bad.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, I think. Yeah, and feel free to, get rid of your video if that would help.
Is that better?
Maybe, for hearing you. I hate that we can't see you, but sometimes, unfortunately, that does help.
Okay, I think for the evil or thorn, I went to assault. Assault or sexual assault, as far as the evil that is not an area where I'm driven to minister, but I have ministered to people who have been assaulted sexually. So that's kind of the thorn or the thing I hate. As far as the thing I love what this book and what this class is talking about marriage and intercourse and how that's a godly and beautiful thing. I love that aspect of it. Could you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Cool. All right. Sounds like that's all part of your calling, Frederick. Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing. Who would like to go next? Okay, Teresa, go for it.
Hi, yes, the Rose. I just love Rosanelle's book. It's given a biblical expression of sexuality that I just hadn't heard. At least there's some gems in there. It's not all new to me, but there's just some gems that just went right to my heart. And
Hmm.
the thorn, of course, is that I didn't know it earlier. So I've already raised my kids. I wish I would have had this kind of insight and information. Uh, I just feel much more at ease in just 2 weeks' time as well. So um, all I can do is just take it with me starting today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, we have a couple more left. Daniela, and then Randy and Nancy. Okay. Got the lineup.
I think for me, the biggest rose has been reading God's view on sexuality as well. I grew up in a Catholic church in Brazil, which is you don't talk about sex unless you're doing something inappropriate and you're going to purgatory, okay? That's all you learn.
Oh, well, that's
So
scary.
I guess we all would be in purgatory if that were true, but I think the book is so beautiful. This view of sexuality has brought so many wonderful conversations between my husband and I. We found we were praying together for our sexuality, which is something we had never done before, to bring that and invite God into it. So it felt so beautiful. I love the idea of redemption that Nancy put in one of the PowerPoints, that God is like waiting to redeem us. And I've seen that with clients when they start talking about their sexuality and how they look at you like a child studying you. And you react with compassion, and all of a sudden they start blossoming in front of you. So I absolutely believe in that's like that area that most people believe it's dark and shameful. And no, you would never talk to your therapist about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you're invited into the room, all of a sudden your connection is so much deeper with your client. And they go, wow, you accept me even though I'm talking about that? Really? It's pretty freeing. So I love that concept of redemption as well, and the biblical inviting God into your sexuality and not seeing it as a wonderful thing. Thorn for me, I think it's kind of like what Stacy talked about is like we all have done so much work on our attachment, our boundaries, our integration, our adulthood without thinking of sexuality. And obviously it goes with adulthood, but I'm finding a lot of integration in it as well. A lot of it, boundaries to attachment, it all goes into sexuality. So it's almost like I've been sitting and playing catch up on my head. Like, what parts of attachment do I need to work on in regards to my sexuality? And boundaries, I need to catch up on this now.
Yeah.
So I think that it was almost like I wish I had thought of my sexuality in terms of the 4 character traits before.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing that, Danielle. Okay, Randy.
Okay, so my rose would be my personal growth. I know you and I talked in my journal entries and had some really good growth over the last couple of weeks, and always like to share what I learn. And so this Saturday and Sunday, I'm doing the devotional to our high school group.
Yay.
And we're going to talk about stewardship and sexuality.
Yay, that's great.
Trying to figure out what that looks like, but I really like the idea of stewardship as a broader vision. And the thorn would be trying to bring my wife into the conversation. I've shared in some of the posts that we were both our family of origin, we don't talk about sex. And as an example, you can see my bookshelf behind me. I had Nancy Houston's book, Love and Sex, displayed. And I came in one day and it was gone. I was like, what happened? And my wife had come in and moved it because she's like, oh, you can't display that, on your bookshelf.
Oh, yeah.
So, so the thorn is just getting her comfortable to enter into that conversation with me as well.
Yeah. Mm, yeah. That can be lonely. Yeah. Mm. All right. Gosh, well, I will be praying for you on Sunday, Randy. That's super cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Nancy.
Okay, my rose is I love talking about sex. I think it's fantastic. So like
you're blooming all over the place.
I mean, I was blooming, I continue to bloom. I'm like a full-blown garden now. So yeah. And my thorn is probably like people don't want to talk about it. They want to keep it hidden, and I would say really kind of along this theme of keeping things hidden in the church, as many of you have talked about already, there's a lot of hiding it, a lot of shame built up around it, not a lot of healing done, really. I don't feel like a lot of interesting viewpoints on what sex should be and what sex shouldn't be. And so just the general hiding, the church hiding anything has kind of been my thorn in the past year. So in particular, sexuality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like wanting to get, rid of all the fig leaves again. It's like, stop hiding.
Yeah. Stop hiding, church.
Yeah. And this is just another area where you're wanting, to stop hiding. Cool.
Yeah. So if you all want to talk about sex,
there you go. Yay. Okay. I think we got everyone's check-in. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so go ahead and pull out the agenda that I sent, if you wouldn't mind. And again, my goal here is to cover the DSM-5 sexual and gender disorders. That is the section where all the sexual and gender disorders are located. How many of you remember studying the sexual and gender disorders in psychopathology? Okay, so I don't know how far back that was for many of you, but a lot of times we go through the different disorders in psychopathology, but then we don't really revisit them in other courses, or I mean, sometimes in practicum and internship, if you're working on your assessment and your diagnostic skills, you might cover a lot of them. But the sexual and gender disorders, I find a lot of therapists aren't really sort of really well versed in what they are and the different categories and the specific different disorders. So I want to go through and just talk about briefly the diagnostic category. I just listed the diagnostic category so you can understand what each of the disorders are. But then I also specifically want to tackle them from that character structure perspective. Okay. So as we go through each one, I want you to be thinking about, because a person can have any one of these diagnoses. Okay. You could diagnose anyone with any one of these diagnoses, but that doesn't tell you anything about their character structure development and where their deficits are. Because a person, for example, might have delayed ejaculation. They might fit the diagnostic category for that, but they might have an attachment deficit that creates that diagnosis. Or they might have more of a separation deficit that creates that diagnosis. Or they might have an integration deficit that creates that diagnosis. Or it might be an adulthood deficit. And that's why they fit the diagnostic criteria for that diagnosis. Okay. And so again, you've heard Dr. Townsend talk over and over and over again that people come in and they present their problems to us, right? But most of the time, the presenting problem is a symptom, or they're a cluster of symptoms. And we need to pay attention to the symptoms, but the symptoms don't define the problem. The symptoms just describe the fact that there is a problem, but getting to the origin of the problem is where we go for the character structure work. And so to just demystify this whole like sexual and gender disorder category in the DSM, right? You want to understand the diagnostic criteria for the different diagnoses, but it's really important to understand that you still want to understand, is it an attachment deficit that's really fueling this? Is it a separation deficit? Is it more of an integration deficit? Like, what's the character structure deficit that's actually fueling this diagnosis? And that's where the treatment is. That's where you start thinking about the mismatching experiences, is where the character structure deficit is. Okay. So let's kind of go through these and then play around with the character structure stuff. So the first category is sexual dysfunctions, and these are disturbances of the sexual response cycle or with painful intercourse. And most of these need to occur for a minimum of 6 months. So if it's less than 6 months, doesn't qualify, but minimum of 6 months. Okay. So the first one, delayed ejaculation. This is a marked delay in frequency or absence of ejaculation. So man can get aroused, but he has a hard time ejaculating. Hard time. Sorry. Thank you. Difficult time ejaculating. Okay, so think about from an attachment perspective. If male has delayed ejaculation, and you notice there's an attachment deficit going on, how are you likely to understand that? What could be happening from an attachment perspective that would create delayed ejaculation? Just unmute yourself and jump in.
Could it
Not
be
safe? Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Nancy.
Not safe for what?
Not safe to be that vulnerable with someone you want love from, affection from, approval from.
Right. Okay. So holding back, right? Like I can be present, but I'm also going to hold back. Think figuratively here with all the sexual dysfunctions and disorders. Think figuratively, because it's kind of like it's a story. It's a language that their body is using to describe what's going on inside. Yeah. Sarah?
I don't know why I went to like if it's a delayed ejaculation and it has to do with attachment, then it's I don't want to lose this moment, right? Like I want to stay attached, and with ejaculation for men, it ends there, right? And so then it's
could be
I don't
right.
want to lose the attachment.
Right. So holding on, yes, to the bonding experience and not wanting it to be finished. That's right. That could be it. And that's where, like, you can have a person present with a delayed ejaculation, but their story about what that means to them, right? That's unique to the person. And that's where it's so important that we go there to understand. Yes, both could be absolutely correct. Okay. How about think about integration, delayed ejaculation from an integration perspective, holding good and bad, grieving over previous losses. Daniela?
Yeah. Something like I'm afraid that I'm not good enough, I can't perform. So I'm holding on, trying so hard to stay here and not let go.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if I'm being good enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or feeling bad. I once had a client who, like, literally, he felt bad, so bad about himself that he almost felt like his semen was bad and that he didn't want to contaminate his girlfriend with his semen. I mean, that's what his story was about. It's like, wow, right? Like, the sexual dysfunctions, they're similar to the eating disorder, like, process where there's so much symbolic, figurative, like, like language around how they're using their body to express their deepest fears, deepest pain, deepest inadequacies, deepest struggles. And that's where you want to go. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Erectile disorder, the marked difficulty obtaining or maintaining an erection. Okay, from an adulthood perspective, how would you describe that? If it's an adulthood deficit.
Objectifying, perhaps.
Okay. Say more. Objectifying what?
Where there's maybe a lot of use of pornography and objectifying.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Objectifying women and perhaps
Right.
might not be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a person who has a difficult time sort of getting aroused, right? So if they're with porn, they can get aroused just fine, maybe. But if they're with a real person, they can't be with a real
But with
person.
their spouse, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
threatening. And so they have a hard time sort of making that arousal connection. Mm-hmm. That's actually very
Right.
common. Yeah. Yeah, it's like a fear. And so they hold back, right? And they don't go there. They don't get the erection. Yeah.
Or feel less than or one down with their partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot, if you've had a male who's been sexually abused too, especially by a female, if they're heterosexual, then it could be that, they're a little boy, they're not a man. And so they're not going to get an erection because like little boys don't, tend to respond in that way. So, yeah. So again, going after the story, the deeper, the deeper content. Perfect. Okay. So female.
Like you were saying, oh, sorry.
Oh, that's
Like
okay.
you said, it's wrong for a little boy to get an injection. Erection,
Frederick,
it's,
I can't.
It's not. It's taboo for a little boy to get around.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Right?
think.
Because
Yes.
that's not what little boys do. Yeah, we're breaking up again. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's okay. But yes, little boys aren't supposed to have sex, and so
I'll type in the chat if I have something to.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Okay. All right, female orgasmic disorder. This is a marked delay in the frequency of or the absence of orgasm. So this is where a female can get aroused, but cannot kind of hit that climax, cannot orgasm. So thinking about maybe from a separation deficit, how might a separation deficit create the inability to have an orgasm?
It's
Too
wrong to
focused
have.
on a partner.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, what'd you say, Erin?
Oh, I was gonna say it's wrong to have your own needs.
Okay.
Kind of what Sophia said too. A little bit.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. It's like I'm like either I'm selfish or I'm bad if I like experience too much pleasure, or because in order to have an orgasm, I mean, at some point a woman's got to own her own body, and she's got to like kind of go into her own space inside of her own head, right? She cannot be thinking about what to make for dinner for her kids, can't be thinking about just what pleasures her husband. I mean, she's got to kind of go into herself. Going toward orgasm for males and for females, it's kind of a self-absorbed process, but it needs to be, right? And so, yeah, if you can't have your own needs, and especially if you feel guilt around like intense pleasure, then maybe arousal's okay, but orgasm's not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. So you're getting the idea of how the different, like character structure processes can play into these. Yes, it could be about abuse as well. Yeah, and gender roles and what your role is. And it's like who gets to experience pleasure and who doesn't. Mhm. Okay, female sexual interest arousal disorder. This is the lack of or significantly reduced sexual interest or arousal as manifested by at least 3 of 6 symptoms. You can always look up those symptoms if you want, but yeah, this is a person who just has a hard time getting aroused. This was me when I first got married many years ago. So from an attachment perspective, what might be going on?
Struggling to attach.
Mm-hmm.
The
And
fear of intimacy.
Right. It can, and this is where it can be a connection or struggle to connect and bond and attach to another person, but it could also be with self, right? Because in order to feel your own body, whether it's feeling tension in your neck or it's feeling the pleasure of a massage, a non-sexual sensual massage, or it's feeling the pleasure of being stimulated sexually, you have to connect to yourself and you have to connect to your own body. And so when it comes to attachment and it comes to sexual attachment, remember, it's not just about connection to another person. It really starts with connection to ourselves and our own body. And I think then in some ways connection to God. And then it's from that place that we connect to another person. But we have to have self first in order to have that kind of intimacy with another person. And so a lot of times people want to bypass relationship with self, connection with self, bonding with self, knowledge and awareness of self, being able to feel yourself, and they just want to go to another person and try to get that connection with another person. And so look for that connection with self as a potential problem in an attachment deficit. Yeah. Okay, genitopelvic pain penetration disorder. This is persistent or recurrent difficulties with at least 1 of 4 symptoms around the thought of or actually occurring vaginal penetration. So this is somebody who experiences pain and vaginal pain at the thought of having something inserted into their vagina or actually having something inserted.
Would that be like integration?
It could be, definitely could be integration. If they, like sex is bad, so I'm gonna feel bad and ultimately push it away. Dyspareunia was the DSM-4 diagnosis for this. They've changed it. But vaginismus is like the tightening of the vagina. It may not involve pain though. Sometimes it does, but sometimes women just experience a tightening of the vagina and they're not in control of it. They're not saying, I'm going to, consciously try to close up, my vagina so you can't get inside of it kind of a thing. But but it can definitely be a power and control thing. But a lot of times it's an unconscious process. Right. And you can see like from an attachment place, right? Like maybe they've been bonded to inappropriately and something was inserted a long time ago that they never wanted. And so they're never going to let something else be inserted again. And it could just be, the body keeps a score, right? It could be literally a trauma, like a memory surfacing of earlier abuse. And it could be that a woman feels very powerless in her life. She's not being an adult financially, and her husband controls her financially. And so she is like, well, I'm going to get control wherever I have control, which is my vagina, which is where you want to get into. So, right. So again, what I really want you to understand is that a person can present with all kinds of symptoms, and the most important thing is if you attune to their story, just encourage them to share their story, and you tune to everything they're saying, they will tell you where their character structure deficit is that is producing the symptoms that give you the diagnostic criteria to label them accurately. But you ultimately treat the character structure deficit place. Okay. Male hypoactive sexual desire disorder. This is persistently or recurring deficient, absent sexual erotic thoughts or fantasies and desire for sexual activity. So hypo sexual disorder, hypo is always like lower than, it's the less than. Hyper is excessive or above. Okay, so this is somebody who just, the male who doesn't get aroused. Okay, and think about from the different areas of character structure development, why that might be the case. I mean, obviously it's an adulthood issue, right? But what has led to that? Yeah. Premature early ejaculation. This is persistent or recurrent pattern of ejaculation occurring during partnered sexual activity within approximately 1 minute following vaginal penetration and before the individual wishes it. So this is just, you know, upon insertion within a minute before the person wants it, they involuntarily ejaculate. They can't control that. Pretty common problem, actually. This is something that I see fairly often. Yeah. So separation. What might be causing this from a separation deficit?
Could it be something like too there's too much of me and you won't there'll be too much and you can't connect with me?
Mm-hmm. It could be.
Like
yeah. Like this this urge to merge that happens and not being sort of solid within self, not being in control of self for one. Not that men can always completely control when they ejaculate, but a lot of men when they learn to connect with themselves can gain more control around that, right? But it's almost like this urgency, like I have to, yeah, like finish, get rid of me, do something with me really fast. I can't just be present. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is
It
that
sounds like there could be
integration?
It could be.
The performance?
Could be performance, yes. Good, bad split there. Mm-hmm. Not being wanted, being pushed away, maybe earlier in life. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you talk too much, right? Like you're too much. So don't be too much. Yeah. What were you going to say, Randy?
I was going to say, it sounds like there may be, or could be shame. It's like, this is dirty. We just got to get it over with, you know,
Yep.
make it happen quickly.
Yes, like an inability to tolerate self, that could be part of the separation. Like I can't tolerate me. I feel so bad. I feel so guilty, right? There's, yeah. And so like I'm just going to get through it, finish it really fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, yeah, like a way of hiding. Yep. Yeah. Okay, good job. Let's just go through some of the others. We've got the substance medication-induced sexual dysfunction. You'll notice that in every category in the DSM, right? At some point you have the substance or medication-induced whatever. And that's when the disorder is due to the, you know, intoxication or withdrawal of a substance. And then in these categories, there are always the other specified sexual dysfunction. So that's when there's a sexual dysfunction, but as it doesn't quite meet all the diagnostic criteria for any one category, but something's present. So say it's like, you know, the female sexual interest arousal disorder, but only for 4 months and not 6. You could use this category. So it doesn't meet the full criteria, but a problem exists. And if the clinician specifies the problem, then it's other specified. And if the clinician doesn't specify the problem, which you would be the clinician, then it would be unspecified sexual dysfunction.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So how can you tell the difference if a woman or a man has, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, like has a disorder that's making them not sexually interested, or if they just don't want to have sex with their spouse? because of relational issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, one, ask.
Ask if they're able to enjoy sexual activity on their own.
Right, on their own, with other partners. Is there something that's happening in this, relationship with your husband that you think might be getting in the way, or that, your struggles might be unique to? Or after, I don't know, had kids, or, just a certain time in life. Yeah, so I think just, asking questions around all that, and then attuning to whatever it is that they share, which then ultimately helps them to get to kind of a deeper level of share and understanding of what's going on.
So if the cause is relational and specific to the relationship, we wouldn't necessarily give that diagnosis.
No, you could, because I mean, first of all, insurance companies don't pay for any of the relational diagnoses anyways. So you have to come up with an individual diagnosis. But regardless of, I guess, the origin, if a person meets a diagnostic criteria for something, you can give the diagnosis for that. But again, I mean, actually, when at the University Counseling Center, we don't diagnose. We don't formally diagnose. I just don't find it helpful. We give diagnostic impressions, but the other thing is, I mean, diagnoses tend to stay with people, at different times in their life. And I just kind of come from that place where I learned how to diagnose. I can diagnose, but in the end, I do diagnose in my private practice when I want, somebody to be able to get insurance reimbursement for their sessions with me. But the diagnosis doesn't tell us a whole lot. It just tells us about how the problem is manifesting itself, but it doesn't tell us anything about ultimately really how to treat them, if you're going to treat them in a holistic way. If you're going to treat the symptoms, it tells you everything to treat, but then you're just treating symptoms.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, the paraphilic disorders. Let's go ahead and go through those, and then we'll kind of end probably with those. So intense interest in or preference for unusual targets of sexual arousal, persisting for at least 6 months, causing clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So a lot of times for a person who has a paraphilic disorder, it's working for them to some degree, but it's got to, it might be causing enough distress in certain areas, usually when they get arrested or when their marriage falls apart or they get caught in some way. But again, be thinking about these different paraphilic disorders from the character structure perspective, because this is where you tend to see people getting aroused in ways that are different than Rosenau encourages people to get aroused. Okay. They're going towards objects, body parts. They're going towards just different methods of connection and attachment that most people don't go toward. Okay. So voyeuristic disorder, that's the recurrent and intense sexual arousal from observing an unsuspecting person, which is huge. The person can't know that they're there. They're not giving consent, who is either naked, disrobing, or engaging in sexual activity as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. Person must be 18 years or older to qualify. So think about somebody who's watching somebody else, and that person doesn't know they're being watched, right? And you think about from an attachment perspective, like, okay, I'm going to connect with you, but I'm not going to let you know I'm connecting with you, right? A separation perspective. Like, I can't show up. I can't ask you to be with me. I can't hold on to me in relationship with you. I have to try to get you by hiding me, right? Think about from an integration perspective. Like I can't, I don't know, like watching you is good, you're good, but I have to hide. I don't know, there's a lot of shame and badness in that perspective. And then obviously from an adulthood perspective, right? This is somebody who's very, very, very young sexually, because they're just taking, but they're hiding at the same time. They're not showing up. They're not owning what they want. Exhibitionist disorder, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from the exposure of one's genitals to an unsuspecting person. as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. So yeah, this is somebody who, it's not about watching somebody else and getting that sort of connection that way, that arousal that way, but it's by, I'm going to show you me, I'm going to expose myself, but I'm not going to ask for permission. I'm not going to see if you want to see me, right? And I'm going to do it in a way that works for me. And so you can think about, again, just kind of developmentally, how young this person is around their sexuality and their sexual identity development. And they've got a story around all that, right? How is it that exposing myself to you without getting your permission and just like violating you in that way, but not sort of raping you, I'm just exposing myself. You're like, how did that come to be? How is that this person's what we call an arousal template? Frauderistic disorder, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from touching or rubbing up against a non-consenting person, as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. Okay, so just again, another way of trying to get something from somebody, connect with somebody, but not owning what they want, and doing it in a kind of a younger way. Sexual masochism disorder, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from the act of being humiliated, beaten, bound, or otherwise made to suffer, is manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. So this is where that sexual masochism disorder is like, I want to be the recipient of that pain. So somehow there's you think about Dan Siegel and talks about, you know, what gets fired together gets wired together. Somehow there's a wiring together of physical pain and pleasure, intense pleasure, sexual arousal, sexual pleasure. Okay, and those got paired together somehow. So what's their story about that? Right? How did that happen? And then sexual sadism disorder, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from the physical or psychological suffering of another person. So that's where I get sexual pleasure by watching you be in pain. And so how did that come to be, right? How did that get wired together?
Could you take a minute to describe that one and where maybe the deficits come in? Because I completely understand masochism, but not
sadism. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the most common would probably be that identification with your perpetrator. So if they were hurt and and they saw in the eyes of the perpetrator that their perpetrator experienced pleasure by watching them in pain, that person's going to internalize that arousal template of their perpetrator, and they're going to end up acting that out on somebody else. That's, I think, probably the most common. So it's an internalization of the perpetrator.
So they watched, for example, a father who beat the mother, or they watched a perpetrator do it, so they weren't a victim.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking that their perpetrator. So if I had a perpetrator and that perpetrator hurt me while also getting sexually aroused, and perhaps by trying to arouse me, then I'm going to internalize that whole perpetration experience, and then I'm going to act that out with somebody else.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, usually when people hurt other people, it's an internalization of their perpetrator or their perpetration. And they identify with their perpetrator, and then they become, rather than being the victim and rather than being powerless, they become the perpetrator themselves. But they act out their perpetration on others in the way that they experienced it themselves.
So could that have some to do with personality and with wounding? So like maybe someone who just tends to be personality more challenging or more like outgoing was then perpetrated against, and so they internalize the perpetrator instead of the victim. And
oh yeah, temperament will play into that. The relationship with their perpetrator will play into that. I mean, some people just aren't wired to hurt other people, and so they're going to have to hurt themselves. And so it could be that they've internalized their perpetrator, but they acted out on themselves. So they're more masochistic. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Pedophilic disorder, recurrent intense sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors involving sexual activity with prepubescent child or children, generally age 13 or younger. Okay, so the person needs to be at least 16 years of age and at least 5 years older than the child. So again, what's the story? Go for the story, go for the attachment, the separation, the identity, the integration, and the adulthood stuff around that. Fetishistic disorder, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from either the use of non-living objects or a highly specific focus on non-genital body parts. Okay. So yeah, like they're not going toward humans, right? When you think about a detachment disorder, you think about psychodynamic theory, they're not moving toward a person in order to connect to, they're moving toward an object or a specific body part. And that's what they're connecting to. Similar to an addiction in a way, the psychodynamic focus of an addiction is the person's connecting to an object and not a person. And doing a relationship with an object and not a person. Transvestic disorder, recurrent intense sexual arousal from cross-dress. And then you have the other specified or unspecified. And then gender dysphoria disorders, those are also in that section. You have gender dysphoria in children. Again, helpful to look up if you're not real familiar with some of these diagnoses, but must have at least 6 or 8 symptoms manifested in play, fantasy, and experience of body. And then gender dysphoria in adolescents and adults, I think is really interesting because you only have to have 2 of 6 symptoms in order to qualify for that diagnosis. And I find that interesting because more and more and more people, right, are having that incongruent experience between their the gendered identity that was given to them, and then their own experience of their identity, their gender identity. And so that when there's that incongruence and you only need to have 2 of 6 symptoms in order to qualify for a diagnosis, which would then qualify you to perhaps, qualify for gender reassignment surgery or hormone therapy or whatever it is that you want to end up doing. In order to try to get a congruency between the gender that you feel like you are and the gender that your body is. It leaves a lot of room for people to have a struggle around that area. Whereas if they said, well, you have to have 4 of the 6 symptoms, like, for children, it's like there's less, there's less room to have a struggle around all that, because at some point, most people, gender identity development is one of those areas of development that we need to tackle. So anyhow, just something to, I think, be aware of. I think that in some ways our mental health diagnostic categories support a lot of the movement that's happening in our culture around people's experience of themselves versus objective reality in some way. All right, so I'll go ahead and cover point number 4, maybe the last class, because I want to try to wrap up. Good night, Teresa. I want to try to wrap up all the stuff around gender and sexual identity and the diagnoses and the arousal template stuff. We didn't really get into that, but I think that's important to look at. So for our last class, we'll cover projective identification of sexuality, and we'll finish talking about professional identity development around, your sexual ethics and where you land in working with folks. Okay, so we'll just pull a bunch of stuff together week 5. Okay, thanks for hanging in there with me. And good evening to everyone and good work. And encourage you to keep going on your personal journey, your own sexual identity development, as well as your professional identity development in this area. Okay. All right, everybody. Good night.
Good night.